We're going over an overview, as it were, of the entire Jujigatami system that I teach. At the very beginning of the system, there's a fundamental fork between speed-based approaches to Jujigatami and control-based. One of the big themes of this video is the idea that I strongly favor control-based variations of Jujigatami. That's not to say there's not a place for speed-based methods, particularly from bottom positions or from standing positions. But if you look at the track record of both my own students and athletes in general in modern jiu-jitsu, you will see that the vast majority of successful applications of Jujigatami come in a controlled step-by-step method rather than just a simple speed-based method. That's why the vast majority of this video is centered around one half of that fundamental change in direction, the control-based methods of Jujigatami. As I teach them, I teach 6 distinct phases that you as an athlete must master and pass through when you go to apply your Jujigatami attacks upon your opponents. The first of these is entry. You've got to have strong entries into the Jujigatami. The second is connection. In particular, the connection of your hips to your opponent's shoulder girdle. Once entry and connection are satisfied, the next big thing we operate with is orientation. Jujigatami is an attack that can occur over 360 degrees of motion. You can be upside down, you can be underneath, you can be rolling your opponent through, you can have your opponent flat on his back. As you roll around your opponent, you must be able to determine the orientation that your opponent finishes in. As a general rule, we tend to favor an orientation where your opponent is put flat on his back and you are on top of him. This is the most controlling variation of Jujigatami. It is not the only one. It is not the only one you must know, but it is our favorite one. And most of the time, we're looking to engineer situations to find ourselves in an orientation where we're on top of an opponent who's flat on his back. The fourth phase of Jujigatami is configuration. There are different kinds of Jujigatami. You can have your legs in a multiplicity of different configurations. Each one has its good points and its bad points. You must understand these different configurations and how to derive benefit from going from one to another. Don't stick with just one configuration. You should be able to pommel your legs from one to another at will to get to the goals that you want to achieve. The fifth phase of the Jujigatami system is the idea of separation. Whenever your opponent feels threatened by Jujigatami, the first thing they're all going to do is lock up their arms. If their right arm is under attack, you can be damn sure they're going to use their left arm to hold their right arm in place and defend themselves. You have to be able to separate your opponent's arms at will. You can't have situations where you do all that good work, go through all the other stages or phases of the Juji, and then get stymied by your opponent locking arms and eventually escaping. So you've got to have effective methods of separating your opponent's arms. Once that occurs, now you get down to the final and 6th stage of the Jujigatami system that I teach, the breaking phase, where ultimately you have to create a lever and fulcrum out of your opponent's arm and get into strong breaking mechanics to get the results you're looking for. So those 6 phases, beginning with entry, then going to connection to the shoulder girdle, onto the sense of orientation, of being able to turn your opponent through 360 degrees of motion, and then onto the subsequent stage of configuration. How am I going to hold my Jujigatami? What are the different options that I have? And then into the separation phase, and then finally the breaking phase. Those 6 distinct phases of operations are the 6 that we'll be showing in a lot of detail throughout this video presentation. Very shortly, I'll start going through each one of those 6 in an overview, but those are the 6 phases of the control side of our Jujigatami system, and our next video presentation, we'll be having a look at those. Now, the big picture of the Judikatami system that I teach is that there's a fundamental fork right at the beginning of the system between control-based approaches to Judikatami, which I like to teach in 6 distinct phases, and speed-based approaches to Judikatami. So those are always the 2 ways you can go. You've got control on this side, you've got speed on the other. Okay, I teach a 6-phase control-based Judikatami. Speed-based Judikatami has only 2. Now this comes at a price. You don't have anywhere near the same amount of control and ability to assert control over time as you do in the control-based methods. Most of what I teach and most of what succeeds at World Championship level is control-based Judikatami. But don't kid yourself. There's an important place and an important role for speed-based Judikatamis out there in competition. If you're going to call yourself a master of Juji, you've got to be strong in both. However, I'm going to make some recommendations to you. There are speed-based approaches to Judikatami from top position. I'm not a big advocate of those. I'm not going to say they're wrong to use, but I don't encourage their use in my students. If you're on top of people and you've worked to get dominant top position, I strongly recommend that you use control-based approaches to Judikatami rather than speed-based. Okay, I know that there's Jiu-Jitsu 101 methods of Juji. Slide down, Pasito. You know, your first day in Jiu-Jitsu, you get taught something like this. We're in a situation, my training partner pushes on my chest. I put my hands around my training partner and I throw my legs around the corner. And it goes, you know, you see these old-fashioned approaches to Judikatami from mounted position. I'm not going to say they're wrong. There's situations where they could work, but realistically at World Championship level, it's going to be hard for them to work, and there's a very high chance that you're going to do all that good work of taking someone down, passing their guard, getting mounted, and then you go for that version of an armbar and you lose everything. The risk is unacceptably high. So if we're going to apply Judikatami from top dominant positions where we're controlling our opponent with body weight, let's keep using that sense of strong, robust control, and let's favor the control-based methods of Judikatami. Nonetheless, from bottom position, I'm a big advocate of the use of speed-based versions of Juji. They definitely can play an important part of your attacks. Are they my favorite? No. I still, even from bottom position, strongly prefer control-based methods. I like to see my opponents, my students lock up their opponent's shoulder girdle, control the head, and in a very controlled, systematic fashion, apply the Judikatami. That's always my favorite way. But as I said, there's a place for speed-based versions. They are quite different. Obviously, as the name would imply, they come on a lot faster. There's only 2 steps. You get your grip, and you break your opponent. Okay, as opposed to 6 steps in the other methods that I teach. Let's have a look at some of the key notions behind speed-based versions of Judikatami. I'm going to start them from guard position because, as I said, I'm a big advocate of these from bottom position, not a big advocate from top. So everything we do will be from the bottom position. Let's start off from closed guard, which is probably the most likely place you're going to use speed-based versions of Juji. Okay. Typically, if we're going to go for some kind of control-based version of Judikatami, everything begins with the control of our training partner's elbow towards the center line. Then from here, we're going to go to control our training partner's shoulder girdle. This is typically done through a top lock. Off the top lock, then from here, we're going to make a rotation, a pivot off the shoulder. That shoulder pivot then gets us into a situation where we make the shoulder-to-shoulder transfer. I go from one shoulder to the other, and then from here, we go to put our opponent down. Then we go into a separation phase where we're going to separate our training partner's hands, put it in the cross chest position, and then from here we go into the final breaking phase. So you can see there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of steps. This stands in contrast to speed-based methods where I simply get a grip on my opponent and I physically go from a closed guard. I throw myself directly to the Judikatami. Now it sounds like it's just 2 steps, but there's quite a bit going on underneath the surface as those 2 steps unfold. Let's have a look at some of these details now. Okay, first thing I want you getting used to. When I first go in, I like to put my opponent's hand close to my center line. Okay, there's ways we can operate when the hand is outside the center line. I'll look at those next, but most of the time I like to have the hand close to the center line. I'm going to demonstrate this from a collar and elbow grip. Okay, when we use the speed-based method, we have to go directly from a closed guard without any top lock, without any control of our opponent's shoulder, directly to the juji. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do it through an asymmetrical split. Okay, I'm going to move my head offline. The head moves first. Then from here, I'm going to split my legs, but I don't split them symmetrically, like so. I bring one knee up and the other foot points outwards. Okay, so if you just excuse me, Placido. I don't split symmetrically. Rather, I split asymmetrically. One knee comes up to my own shoulder and the toes of the other foot point outwards. My intention is to create space between my hamstring and my opponent's lat muscle. So, we come in. From here, there's the asymmetrical split. Because there's space between my right hamstring and his lat muscle, I turn easily, directly from the closed guard situation. If my legs split symmetrically, I tend to be unable to turn. My own right leg holds me in place and I can't make a pivot. So what I have to do is get my head offline, and there's the asymmetrical split. It's that which enables me to whip my leg directly over the cross-face leg. Watch my right wrist. My right wrist, as the right foot comes down, goes in here. So I just briefly let go as the leg goes over my training partner's neck. When my training partner goes to stack me, it's not an easy thing, because my direction leg, or the torso leg as we often call it, is pushing directly up into our training partner's armpit. And as a result, we'll have a strong break to work with. So we go in, we catch. From here, my head goes offline and we get that asymmetrical split. The asymmetrical split means I have a very easy rotation of my cross-face leg straight around the corner and a good catch. My torso foot comes down and touches my own shin. So when my opponent goes to pull his arm free, it's a difficult thing. When he goes to stack me, that too is a difficult thing, and we go directly to the break. It's very important when we use this method that we connect our training partner's wrist to our chest. If my opponent can figure four his arms, he can create a solid defense to the Jujigatami, which will require me to go into some kind of sweep, put him on his back and separate. Okay? If I can keep his hand connected to my chest and he tries to figure four his arms, it's physically impossible. The only thing he can do is lock his fingers, and that's not going to stop the juji. My legs are stronger than his fingers. If they're not, you're in trouble. So, from here, we come in and catch. There's the asymmetrical split. Now, I throw everything together. When he goes to lock his hands, that will not stop the extension of my hips and the break. Okay? Now, here's an interesting point. Everything I've been talking about has mostly been bound up with this leg, which will ultimately be the cross-face leg. But the unsung hero here is this leg. This torso leg is what enables me to pull my leg around the corner and get my knee higher than Placido's ear. If my knee is lower than his ear, you'll never form a satisfactory connection. There's a mountain of space here, and when I go to hit the break, he'll just pull his elbow free and gone. I have to get my knee higher than his ear. And the only way I can do that is through the action of my right leg. It comes up initially in the asymmetrical split, so there's distance between my right leg and his lat muscle, and then it clamps down. That is what enables me to throw this leg high and form a good deep bite on my training partner's head and neck. Now, even with no hands, when Placido goes to pull his arm free, it's very, very difficult. You've got a very, very strong connection and the possibility of a strong break. Okay? So we start off in a closed guard situation. I bring the hand in right from here. Look how my head goes offline and everything's in place. And you can see it's a fast Jujigatami that snaps on. Even if he did lock his hands now, it made no difference. We'll go straight through into the break. Okay? The only thing that will stop you is if we figure fours, and there's just not time for that. So once again, hand goes to center. I take the collar, there's the asymmetrical slip, and there's everything in place. It takes about a heartbeat to get the legs in. You can see, essentially, there's only 2 steps. You get your grip and you go. Once the grip is on, the next stop is the Jujigatami itself. Let's have a look at it in a kind of a real speed so you get a sense of what it would be like in a competitive setting. From a situation where we have an opponent here in our guard, we go through and get our grip. There's the asymmetrical split. Notice there's distance between my right leg and his lat muscle so that my body can make the turn and the pivot that's necessary. And then we're up. Okay. So once again, hand goes in and we catch. When we catch, my knee is higher than his ear. If my knee is lower than his ear, that's when I can't form an effective back heel and we lose the juji. Now, even with no hands, he stands up, goes to pull me off the floor, the arm won't come out. And as a result, we get very strong breaks for the finish. From a different angle, hand goes in, catch. It's all very quick, and there's not much reaction time for your opponent. Hand catches, and there's the speed-based finish from bottom position. That's one excellent way to hit the move from a collar and elbow grip. Now an obvious question here is, okay, what if I can't get his hand to the center line? What do I do now? No problem. You can hit a slight modification of this move using a lat pinch grip. What's a lat pinch grip? Okay, closed guard situation, hands on biceps, and I can't get the hand to the center line for whatever reason. I thread through and my hands go inside. I bring my elbow over his wrist and I clamp over the wrist. I grab my training partner by the head. No need to hold on to the elbow, it's just that. Okay? When he goes to yank away, it's not easy because of the collar tie. Now, in one motion, I hit that same asymmetrical split that we saw earlier. So my head moves out, and there's the asymmetrical split. Okay? Off that asymmetrical split, the legs go in, we've got the perfect entry. You can either take the hand to the center, or you can keep it underneath. I leave that up to you. It usually happens that the hand does come out when you're in a competitive setting. That'll depend a little bit on your height and his height. So I go through and I pinch over the wrist. I catch here at the head. He goes to yank out. It's not as easy as it looks. Now from here, there's the asymmetrical split. And now we've got a good deep bite on our training partner's head and neck. Even with no hands, he goes to stand up. My whole body will come off the floor before the arm comes out. Once again, we go through and catch. And you can see in very little time, we've got a particularly strong lock. So these are some good ways in which we can use this asymmetrical split to get a very, very fast entry into Jujigatami out of closed guard scenarios. Let's look now at a different scenario. We've got a standing opponent, and he's elected to go into a collar tie. Not a bad thing for him to do. It can help him to pass guard, etc., etc. I'm going to take my hand either to his tricep or my own collar tie, and we're going to focus on a fall that puts our foot around our training partner and creates another speed entry into Jujigatami. When he goes to pull away, it's not going to be an easy thing. And from here, it'll be quite easy for us to put him down to the mat and get into a winning position. Here, things are a little different because our training partner is standing. Okay, we go in and catch our training partner, gripping like so. Look how as I sit down, my foot comes around the corner and we form that good hook onto our training partner. Always in these situations, we want our knee higher than his ear. So there's his ear, there's my knee is clearly higher. When he goes to pull away, that hook to the opponent's head makes for a strong connection that'll make for a good robust turn down through the mat. Once again, we have a training partner standing over us. From here, he goes in for a collar tie. Not a bad thing for him to do, because now if he pushes my knees out to the side, I can start passing my guard. So it's definitely not a bad thing for him to do. We go in and catch our training partner. Look out, from here, there's no asymmetrical split. There's just a fall, a foot goes in, and we make a good catch on our training partner. My 2 feet pointing down, and as a result, we can finish it either from bottom position, or we can put him down to the mat and finish him on top. Another form of speed juji, which I often have my students work on from bottom position, is from underneath the pin, bottom side control. If I get a good frame in here, I can take my 2 thumbs and post them inside my training partner's biceps, and we focus now on a good bridge and then a head slip. My head slips inside my training partner's biceps, and as a result, we can make an excellent catch. That puts our opponent down and gives us a situation where we can easily pass legs across and start going into a finishing position. Once again, we have an opponent. He's got top position just like so. We focus on a heavy bridge and then a slip of the head. Then the legs come up and catch. That places him down and gives us a good opportunity to feed our legs across. Key elements involved here. When we go to work in these types of situations, that initial bridge is over my right shoulder, and then my feet leave the mat and my head goes inside his bicep. Once the head goes inside the bicep, we make that same catch that we've been talking about. As always, second foot comes across. With 2 feet across, we're in a strong braking position. Another form of speed juji, which I often advocate, comes out of seated butterfly guard. He's on 2 knees. From here, we'll go through and catch our training partner with the elbow 2-on-1 grip. From here, I'll fake what looks like a triangle attack, and then let my legs go over the top like so. I catch my training partner at the wrist, and the second leg goes over, and we finish with 3/4 jujigatami. This is one of my favorite jujigatami attacks of them all from bottom position. So we go in, we catch a wrist. From wrist, we go elbow 2-on-1. Foot goes on my training partner's hip, always on the same side as the leg, and as a result, I can make that initial catch. Now I just pivot off my training partner's shoulders. When he goes to yank away, it's such a difficult thing to prevent the 2 legs going over the head, and we get a very strong break and finish. Once again, we catch. From here, that's my leg configuration, like I've locked a guard over the top of my training partner's clavicles. Now from here, we control our training partner's wrist. We turn off the shoulder, second leg goes in place, and there's our finishing position. Some other speed jujigatamis that I often advocate occur in standing situations. As a general rule, when it comes to speed juji, as I said earlier, I'm not a big believer in speed juji from top. I really believe that the control-based methods are way more high percentage. Focus on those. If you've done the hard work of taking your opponent down, passing his guard, and getting a top position, slow it down. Okay, use your control and assert that kind of positional dominance with a purpose and get your finishes. But done from bottom, speed juji can catch a lot of people by surprise. You've got nothing to lose. You're already in bottom position. You're not sacrificing a dominant top position. So I'm much more free in letting my students go with speed-based duties from the bottom situation. Also from standing. If I have an opponent in a seated guard underneath me, this is neutral territory. I don't have a dominant position on him and he doesn't have one on me. So if it all went wrong, you don't really lose anything. You didn't really have anything to begin with. So from situations like this, with this facing this way, we'll have opponents. Often there's a lot of reaching, etc., etc. They're looking to control us. And in situations like this, very often we'll be able to step our foot to the outside position, just outside his foot, just like so. And as a result, I'll be able to chop my leg over my training partner's neck with something that looks rather like a flying triangle. But we'll turn it into a flying armbar instead. From here, my foot goes up towards my training partner's shin, and in one motion, just goes straight over the top. Then from there, we bring the second leg over, and we finish with a 3/4 jujigatami. And this is a very realistic way to use speed-based methods to go directly from a grip to the lock itself. Okay, so there's my initial grip. I'm just gripping on the outside. I force his second hand down, and look how in one motion I turn almost side on to my training partner, and there's the catch. Second leg comes in, and there's the juji for the finish. So these would be good examples of speed-based judokitamis. My general point that I raised to you is, if you're in top position, focus on control-based methods. Okay, try to get away from, slide down, Jiu-Jitsu 101 methods of speed-based top entries. Okay, from here there's just so little control of your opponent's arms. It's so easy for him just to pull his arm free as we go around the corner. It's a disaster. Okay, there are a few top position jujis that I teach and advocate. If you lie down from side position, I'm not completely averse to the idea of whipping a leg over and going into juji from here. You can probably guess why. Because yes, it is a speed-based method, but if it all went wrong, you're still on top of your opponent. Okay, if he pulled his elbow free, you're still on top and you could go to work. Okay, so this one I don't mind too much. But as a general rule, if you're in top position, use the control-based methods. Bottom position, on the other hand, don't be afraid to go out there and use your speed-based methods. Are they as good? Are they as high percentage in modern day competition as control-based methods? No, they're not. But they have a place. And it's an important place. They have surprise value. And surprise is a big deal in combat sport. You can shock someone, surprise them, you'll finish a lot of people. You won't be able to do it forever. Because once you lose the element of surprise, they're going to start countering you. So that's why control-based methods have a much higher track record of success in top-level competition than speed-based methods. But they have their place, and those methods that I just showed you can definitely work effectively for you. Okay, we've been looking at this idea that at least the control side of our judokitami system is based around 6 distinct phases. The first of these is the entry phase. Let's have a look at what is the big insight that I try to teach in the entry phase, and this is the relationship between your opponent's elbow and his center line. Okay, obviously the center line, the line that runs down the center of every human body, the relationship between his elbow and center line. Okay, whenever we're facing our opponent and we're in front of our opponent, whether it be top position or bottom position or what have you, I'm always looking to get my opponent's elbow towards the center line. Okay, if I'm ever behind my opponent and attacking from the back with judokitami, then it's the exact opposite. It's about taking your opponent's elbow away from the center line. That simple core insight is the basis of how we enter into judokitami, regardless of what position we're in. Let's understand that there are 6 main scenarios that we have to be able to enter effectively into judokitami. Okay, if you lie down, Placido. The first scenarios are those where I am directly in front of my opponent. Okay, this can be done in both top position, mount, and bottom position, guard. Guard and mount, of course, are just inversions of each other. They're the same position, one on top, one on bottom. Okay, so we're in front of someone or on top of someone. This is one scenario. Okay, the front position, top and bottom. Another scenario are side positions. These are radically different because the angle of attack and the angle of entry is very, very different from being directly in front. And here too, we can be on top, which is the more common scenario, or we can be on bottom, the less common scenario, but still one that we can hit effective judokitamis from here. The third big scenario that we work with are situations where you are behind people. Okay, and from here we have to be able to hit effective judokitamis. This is a very, very good attacking position to work with. Now, as always, we can do it from underneath. Currently I'm underneath Placido, but I'm behind, and we can work. Or we can be on top of our opponent, and still we should be able to attack with judokitami. Okay? So there are 6 scenarios in which you must be able to enter. Front, back, and side, and in all 3 cases, 2 variations, top and bottom. So there are 6 main scenarios when we work on the ground. Obviously, there's standing entries into Jujigatami as well, but we'll cover that in a different video. Those are the main 6 scenarios in which you must be able to work. In all 6 scenarios, the number one thing that you must focus on for success is the relationship between your opponent's elbow and center line. So let's have a start looking at this now. Okay, from closed guard situations, for example, as long as Placido's elbows are outside my hips, I will never be able to make a strong elbow Placido. I'll never be able to turn my hips and create an angle on my opponent to get the Jujigatami. I'll never be able to bring my cross-face leg over his head. So our whole thing when we work in these situations is to bring the elbow towards the center line. Only when the elbow goes forward to the center line can I start creating angles on my training partner, which will give me Jujigatami. Okay? This is true also if we're on top of our opponent in a mounted position. The more my opponent's elbows are down here, the harder it becomes for me to be able to successfully apply the armbar. So everything we look to do in these situations is to walk elbows up towards the center line, and from here we can go in and start scoring decisive attacks on our training partner. But it all begins with that ability on our part to get the elbow moving towards the center line. You're not going to enter Juji from the front, either top or bottom, until you can get your opponent's elbow extended out towards the center line. That's our game. So a big part of our video as we go further into this video will be exactly how do we do this? What are the techniques? You'll be looking later in this video at all kinds of methods. Collar and elbow methods, outside overtime methods. These are all effective methods of getting the elbow across the center line and into a winning position. Sometimes you'll learn that if I can't bring his elbow towards my center line, I'll move myself around his elbow in order to create an artificial movement towards the center line. For example, I can put my hips all the way out to the side, so as a change in angle puts his elbow close to the center line, and from here we can go and get our finishes. You'll be learning all these sorts of details. From side position 2, the same thing is true. Flatten your legs. From here, the further his elbow is from the center line, the less likely it is for me to get into a successful Jujigatami. So our whole thing in these situations is always, how am I going to get his elbow right onto the center line? Because only when that occurs will I now be able to go into a successful application of Jujigatami. Okay? If I have an underhook, for example, this is just one excellent way for me to be able to take his elbow up to the center line. Okay, a very controlling and effective method for me to turn the corner on my training partner and start going into good Jujigatami attacks. When we're behind people, on the other hand, everything changes. Now, the closer his elbows get to the center line, the more difficult it is for me to hit a Jujigatami. So interestingly, when you're behind people, everything changes. It goes the opposite. Now we want the elbow moving away from the center line. Only when the elbow moves away from the center line can we start going into our various attacks from the bottom position and attacking. Okay. If we're on top, same thing. Facing the camera. The closer his elbow is in towards the center line, the harder it is for me to be effective here. So we always want to flare everything out and away from the center line when we're working from the back. And only then will we be able to put our opponent into situations where we can go through and get to the win. So there's our first general sense of direction in this first phase of Jujigatami system. The entry phase, the central insight that I want you guys working with, is the relationship between your opponent's elbow and center line. Whenever you're in front of people, we want the elbow coming towards the center line. Whenever you're behind people, you want the elbow moving away from the center line. This core insight is the most important one for you to carry with you in the first critical entry phase of our Jujigatami system. Now, let's go on to the second critical phase of the Jujigatami system that I teach. This is the connection phase. Okay, what connects to what? What is this connection you keep talking about? It's the connection of my hips to my opponent's shoulder girdle. Okay, this is we get true regardless of whether it's top or bottom position. I'll demonstrate it from bottom position first. Understand this: Judigatami, in the end, is a break upon your opponent's elbow, but it always begins as a control of your opponent's shoulder. Okay, as in any joint lock, if you're going to go to break a joint, you need to control the joint above it. So if we're going to go to break the elbow, I need to control the joint above it, the shoulder. When we're in bottom position, our favorite way of doing this is the so-called top lock method. Okay, this is not the only method, but it's a damn good one, and it's probably the most popular in modern day competition. From any situation where I get a hold of my training partner's head, I start walking my legs up, I throw a leg over my training partner's shoulder, and we lock our closed guard over the shoulder, the so-called top lock. Okay, once we get into a top lock, you have control of your opponent's shoulder girdle. When he tries to posture up and away, it's not an easy thing. Okay, when my guard is locked down here, he postures up easily. There's no weight over the head and shoulders. But once we take the top lock position, now there's weight and strength directly over our opponent's head and shoulders. So when he goes to posture up and away, it's not an easy thing. Then from here, we can make a pivot off that shoulder that we're controlling. And as a result, when he goes to yank away, it's not an easy thing. From here, get a good turn, and we're in a good position to put this guy down into a winning position. This is my favorite way of controlling the shoulder. Why? Because it's an example of a closed wedge. We know that closed wedges are generally more robust than open wedges. There are times, however, when you feel the closed wedge may be difficult, for example, on someone who's very broad-shouldered, or perhaps you might have very short legs. In these situations, we work with open wedges. So instead of a top lock, we might use, for example, a shoulder pivot, where from a closed guard situation, instead of me locking my legs, I just place a leg over my training partner's shoulder. Then I use his shoulder to pivot off. Okay, so even though I didn't work with closed feet, the wedges were open, it's still pretty strong, pretty robust, and enables us to turn successfully off the shoulder and get into a strong Judigatami attack. Okay, but again, you're controlling the shoulder first and then pivoting off that controlled shoulder into the Judigatami. So too, from top position, if we're mounted, for example, when we come around the corner on a training partner, you'll notice my knee comes up towards our training partner's ear. We've got excellent control of this man. Now, as my second foot comes up and we make that turn, again, we have that strong control of the shoulder girdle. And then the transfer from one shoulder across to the other creates a very, very strong entry into Judigatami and an excellent control of the shoulder girdle as a whole. Everything we do, thank you, is bound up with this idea of strong connection to our training partner's shoulder. This isn't just for the entry method, but also the control position. Once we have an opponent down, broken down, locking arms up, broken down into the Judy position, I cannot, as it were, remain stationary while my opponent is moving away from me. That's going to lose that critical shoulder to hip connection. If he moves away from me, you can see the further his shoulder gets away, the easier it is for him to slip his elbow inside my hips and escape. So our whole thing is always, as he goes to move away, to move with him, to shuffle our body with his and get correspondingly close and tight to our opponent's shoulder girdle. Okay, the further the distance between my hips and his shoulder, the less successful I'm going to be in a competitive setting. So we're always looking to consistently work and move in towards our opponent's shoulder. If I ever feel I'm losing that connection, I will stop whatever I'm doing. I don't care how close to a break I am, I'll have the discipline to stop whatever I'm doing and reassert that connection. This is true regardless of whether we're on top or in the bottom position. So too, in here, once we get our legs up, if I feel for whatever reason I'm starting to lose that connection, I will reconnect, start again, and relock my top lock. I will never allow slippage of my hips away from my opponent's shoulder, which makes it so easy for him to pull away. Our whole thing is to get to a strong connection and then to keep it by constantly pulling our hips up off the floor from bottom position or driving our hips forward from top. Never sacrifice that simple idea, because that's the core of Judogatame control. That powerful connection between your hips and your opponent's shoulder girdle, the area around the deltoid, armpit, and head. That's the key to control and success with all Judogatames, regardless of top or bottom position. Now, the third phase that we emphasize in our Judogatame system is the orientation phase. Whenever you go into Judogatame in a highly competitive setting, there is a very high likelihood that you will have to tumble through 360 degrees of motion in order to get the win. You cannot have situations where you have a Judogatame and your opponent changes his position slightly and you lose connection with your opponent. You must be able to follow movement through 360 degrees and get to the win. You should ideally be able to break your opponent at any moment in all of those 360 degrees. Granted, there's one position we favor above all others, that's where my opponent is flat on his back, but you should be effective, even if it's not your preferred breaking position, in all the various orientations you could find yourself in. It's critical that you know what to do so that you can determine the direction of the orientation back to the one which we favor most of all. The one we favor most of all is one where my opponent is flat on his back. Okay? And I have two legs across and controlling. This is the most controlling position in which to finish Judogatame. So we should have effective ways of getting people to here and keeping them here. Okay? If we start off in bottom position, and we go into Judogatame. This is one orientation. I'm belly up to the ceiling, okay? But with a little bit of change in angle where my hips come out, I can easily turn my opponent down and change the orientation. Okay, now he's flat on his back. If my opponent managed to free his legs, scissor, and come back up on top of me, and from here he went to stack me, I could take my arm around the corner and come out the back door. Now we're in a different orientation where my opponent is now face down towards the floor, and I'm in a position now where I can go through and roll my training partner over and put him back into a more preferred orientation where again he's flat on his back. It might be that in the course of all this I feel the need to put body weight on my opponent and roll across his body and take a top orientation where I'm literally pinning him with my body weight. And from here we get particularly strong forms of Judogatame because I'm literally sitting on top of him. It's almost like a pin. If I overextend in a situation like this, we can always end up rolling on through, going back through. You can see what's happening. We're rolling an opponent through 360 degrees of motion, so that it doesn't really matter that much where we are at any given moment. What does matter is that we can control the direction of our opponent's movement back to our preferred situation where he's flat on his back. If I find I cannot control where my opponent finishes up, I can't, for example, put him flat on his back, I should also have the ability to get a successful arm break in any one of those orientations we found ourselves in. Whether I'm chest down to the floor, chest up to the ceiling, underneath, top, bottom, it doesn't matter. This ability to control and direct the orientation of your opponent through 360 degrees of motion is going to be a big part of what will make you successful at the application of Judogatame. Now, the next phase in the Judo system is the configuration phase. There are a multiplicity of different forms of Judogatame. There is, for example, what we call a quarter Judogatame, where just one leg goes across as a crossface, the other leg does not even go across my opponent's body. There is a half Judogatame, where one leg goes across the body over the torso, and the other leg is short and does not go across the head. There are three-quarter Judogatames, where I have two crossface legs, both legs going across my opponent's face. There is the full Judogatame, where I have a crossface leg and a torso leg. There is a closed Judogatame, where my feet close like a closed guard around my opponent's two legs. There are scissor judokatamis, where my two legs scissor around my training partner's head and lock on like so. There are Senkaku judokatamis, where we lock a triangle around our training partner's head, and from here we work with an extended arm, kind of a compromise between stranglehold and arm lock. There are shoulder Senkaku judis, where we bring a Senkaku, a triangle, around our training partner's shoulder girdle. There's no cross-face leg, there's no torso leg, but there is a set of closed wedges around our training partner's shoulder girdle where he tries to pull out and move out. It's very, very difficult, and you get particularly strong breaks from these situations. Okay, so you can see that's not even a complete list of the various judokatamis, but you can see there's a multiplicity of different duties that we can employ. Each one has its good points and its bad points. Some are very strong for entering, some are very strong for finishing, some offer greater control of the head, some offer greater control of the body, some are better for sweeping people from bottom position, some are better for rolling people from top position. They all have their good and bad points. In this video, we'll be looking at what are the good and bad points of each and learning how we can use them in unison. Try to get away from situations where you limit yourself to one form of judokatami. Okay, when you do this, you become like a workman who has only one tool, so you'll be good at one task. But there's many tasks out there in jiu-jitsu, and so the more tools you have, the better you'll be as a workman down on the mats. Let's understand something. If you're going to be someone who goes through the multiplicity of different judokatamis, you got to know a little bit about posture. If I sit square to my opponent and his arms are in relatively tight, it can be tough to thread feet in and start pommeling from one judokatami to another. So as a general rule, I often have my students work with asymmetrical legs, where we put a hand on the floor or an elbow for balance, okay, so that I can get away from a perfectly lined up symmetrical upper body and symmetrical legs to one where I can create asymmetrical legs. Okay, my legs kinked in a rather strange configuration like so. This kinked configuration means that it becomes very, very easy for me now to start pommeling my legs into all the various different forms of judokatami without much difficulty. If I'm symmetrical, it requires quite a bit of flexibility to get feet inside small crevices, and I now lose connection with my training partner's shoulder, and as a result he could probably pull his elbow free while I try to make the adjustments. So we have to get used to the idea of creating kinked asymmetrical legs like so. This also makes it much easier for me to move around my opponent's body. If my legs are symmetrical and he moves away from me, it's very awkward for me to follow his movements. But when my legs are asymmetrical like so and he moves away from me, it's very, very easy for me to shuffle, okay, and move with him. It also makes it very easy for me to access my training partner's legs. It makes it, as we saw earlier, extremely easy to pommel into various other forms of judokatami and get the successes that we're looking for. So let's get used to the idea of using the full multiplicity of the various forms of judokatami. Let's get used to the idea of using asymmetrical legs so that we can take advantage of these variations and fulfill a much wider array of tasks with judokatami than we could if we limited ourselves to one. Now let's go on to the fifth of the phases of the judokatami system. This is the separation phase. Okay, we all know that judokatami is ultimately bound up to the idea of breaking our opponent's elbow. Your opponent knows that, so if you get the judokatami position, there's going to be a lot of resistance. Typically, the first line of resistance you got to run into is always going to be that of your opponent locking his arms together. Okay, he knows if the arm is unchecked, you can quickly straighten it out and break it. So the first thing they're all going to do is start locking up their arms. When they go to lock their arms, they've got a bunch of choices. Okay, there's three main choices that they can make. They can use hand-to-hand variations. Within that subcategory, they can go fingertip to fingertip, they can go palm to palm, or they can go wrist to wrist. Okay, which one your opponent chooses, that's up to them. So we have to be effective against all of them. Next method they can use are elbow to elbow methods. Okay, and this closes the space between their forearms and their chest and presents some new challenges for us as the person trying to separate their arms. And probably the most popular and effective method for them to use is to figure four their arms and put a hand inside our thigh. And this again presents new challenges for us as the guy that wants to separate our opponent's arms. As a general rule, what I like to see my athletes do is put their opponent into a mechanically disadvantageous position that we call the cross chest position. So Placido lies down. When he first locks his hands, he'll demonstrate out of a palm-to-palm grip, but the same would be true if he had elbow-to-elbow or what have you. As long as his two forearms are lined up in pretty much a straight line, he feels very, very strong in this position. Okay, so if I have Judy Gatami and I just lock in on my training partner and pull, I don't really have any mechanical advantage here. I'm pulling against the strength of his entire shoulder girdle, chest, etc., etc. All that changes if I take Placido's forearm and I put it across my chest. Okay. Now when he goes to pull in, he's pulling with the weak rotator cuff muscles on the back of his shoulder. He's no longer using the combined strength of his chest, shoulder girdle, and upper back. It's much easier for me to fight against these small, weak rotator cuff muscles than it is against his entire shoulder and back girdle. And as a result, from here, it's not a difficult thing for us to go through and start separating arms. Okay. In order to take advantage of this cross-chest position, we have to be able to make use of a simple four-step system, which will be outlined in this video, but I'll give you a sneak preview now. Typically, first step is we start elbow to elbow. Elbow to elbow I can do in two ways. I can either put my thumb to my own clavicle, that's one good way, or I can put my hand on my own thigh. And from that asymmetrical leg position, when my opponent goes to pull out, there's a really strong connection of my hips to my opponent's shoulder girdle. So this is an excellent way to hold and control people. However, it is a feeble method of actually separating my opponent's arms. It's great for holding people, not good for separating arms. When it's time to separate arms, we're going to go back to symmetrical legs and we're going to come up elbow to wrist so that we can create the cross chest position where his forearm literally just goes across my chest. Okay. Now, this is the second phase. Okay. Elbow to wrist, cross chest. So the first phase was elbow to elbow, hand on my own clavicle or hand on my own thigh. Then we go to phase two, where we go elbow to wrist and we go cross chest. From the cross chest position, things start to get interesting. It's tempting just to separate the arms and fall back, right? The arms, but now something bad happens. That cross chest that was so good for separation turns out to be a problem in the third element. Now, as I fall back, my opponent's thumb is pointing downwards, and he can easily turn out and escape from the lock. Okay? So you see, we have to relativize our grip to the task at hand. When it's time to control people, elbow to elbow is perfect. When it's time to separate hands, cross chest, elbow to wrist is perfect. But now once the hands do separate, we need something else. We need to stop the turnout. And the way we stop the turnout is by going wrist deep around our training partner's elbow and connecting our opponent's right elbow to our right hip. So that when he goes to turn out, his elbow is on the incorrect hip. He needs his elbow on my left hip to turn out. When he goes to turn out now, it's physically impossible. Now that the turnout has been stopped, it's time to go into breaking. Okay? It's almost impossible to successfully break arms if we come up to the wrist with our elbows and just hug, as you so often see people do. If my opponent has any defensive skills at all, he will easily turn his thumb down, and from here he will continue to turn out and escape. So let's be sure of something. We need to get two hands on the wrist. Don't be satisfied with anything else. Don't have one hand. Don't try to hold with one elbow, etc., etc. These will only work if your opponent essentially quits. Okay, but if your opponent is mentally strong and knows how to employ a turn and escape, you should always be able to get out of this position. What will stop him is proper gripping at the wrist. Okay, I have to be able to control the direction of my opponent's thumb. Best way for me to do this is to take a half hand grip, where half of my hand is on his hand and half is on his wrist. Okay. From this position, we lock up on our training partner, two hands on the wrist, And now when he goes to complete the turnout, it's easy for me to keep his thumb pointing away from the direction of the turnout. If he can get his thumb pointing in the direction of the turnout, he can escape. So our whole thing is to get the half hand grip, 2 hands on, and keep the thumb pointing in the directions we want to go. When he goes to turn out now, it's significantly more difficult for him. And as a result, we'll be able to finish a lot more judikatamis. Okay? These key insights with regards to the separation phase, working our way steadily towards the cross chest position, and then going in this 4-step sequence of elbow to elbow, elbow to wrist, right elbow to right hip, and 2 hands on one wrist to determine the direction of the thumb, and into our final breaking sequence. These are the core elements behind this separation phase. Will be seen, as I said earlier, in a lot more detail as the video goes on. But that's the big picture I want you taking as you go further into this video. Now we've gotten through 5 distinct phases, and now we arrive at the 6th and final phase of the judikatami system that I teach. This is the breaking phase. Once you've done all that good work and controlled your opponent through those first 5 phases, now it's time to actually seal the deal and get the break. The most important rule with regards to breaking is what I refer to as the right rule. For a situation where Placido is down, giving you a general sense of the picture, which will be put in minute detail as we go further into this video. The big picture that I want you to first get in here is the idea that if I'm going to go to break my training partner's right arm, then I want to have his right elbow going over my right hip, his right hand going towards my right shoulder. Right. And from here, when he goes to pull away, everything's lined up in a direction where, for the first time, we start to get a truly efficient breaking fulcrum. Understand something about judikatami. Juji is probably the single clearest example of lever and fulcrum in application in all of jiu-jitsu. It's a straight lever broken over a fulcrum. Understand something. The fulcrum is not, as many people preach, the inner thigh muscles due to your knees being squeezed together tightly. Okay, I don't care how strong you are, your inner thigh muscles are not a hard fulcrum over which to break your opponent's arm. There are 2 things that determine the efficiency of the fulcrum over which you want to break your opponent's arm. The hardness of the fulcrum and the height of the fulcrum. The higher and harder the fulcrum, the better your breaks are going to be. So I want to use the hard hip bone rather than the soft inner thigh muscles as my fulcrum. So we want to take his right elbow over our right hip. In addition, I want the fulcrum to be as high as possible. If my legs extend, then the fulcrum is very, very low. And as a result, we get mediocre breaks. So what we want are our feet drawn up. I'm going to take my torso leg and bring it higher than my cross-face leg and touch my foot to my own shin. This slightly increases the height of the fulcrum and creates stronger breaks. When Placido goes to pull away from me, those tightly scissored legs make it very, very difficult. Okay? So we focus on the idea of the right rule, where everything goes on the right side or the left side, depending upon which side of my opponent's body I'm on. If I'm attacking his right arm, I want his right elbow going over my right hip, his right hand going towards my right shoulder. Another critical idea in this breaking phase, the idea of the fulcrum should be as high as possible and as hard as possible. The hardest fulcrum you have to break the elbow over is your hip bone. So let's make sure everything goes over the hip, not down through the middle of the adductor muscles. Okay? Everything goes over the hip. Let's make sure the fulcrum is high. We bring our knee up, just like so, and we get very strong breaks. And now the last key to the puzzle. This is the idea of coupled forces. Whenever we go to break a human joint, and this is true regardless of the joint lock that I show you, We never want to create single forces upon our opponent's joint. It's always two forces in opposing directions. The single best way for me to do this is to create a combination of push and pull with my two hands. Most people, when they go into Judogatame, have two pulling hands. They put two hands on their opponent and they pull down. You can see that Plussy, though, is quite a flexible athlete. And when I pull down with two hands, it's quite difficult for me to get a break. What I want to do is take one elbow high and one elbow low, so that I have a pulling hand with my right hand and a pushing hand with my left. And it's the combination of pull and push, with one elbow going down to pull and one elbow going up to push. This is what creates true braking pressure. And from here we can get very, very strong brakes. So I have a pull with one hand, a push with the other. And in this way we can create very, very strong brakes. If these, for whatever reason, should prove to be inadequate, the strongest brakes of them all involve behind the back brakes, where I take my opponent's hand from in front of my chest to behind my back. In these situations, we grab a hold of our own thigh and our own shin. We connect our foot into our own shin just like so, and we have, as it were, all four limbs involved in the break. You have the cross-face leg, you have the torso leg, and you have both of your hands supporting those two legs. So when my opponent goes to pull away from me, it's incredibly difficult. And from here, the brakes are shockingly strong. So once again, we lock up with our training partner. Our whole thing when we go into the final braking phase is explicated around the idea of the right rule. Okay, his right elbow going over my right hip, his right hand going to my right shoulder. We always want the idea of coupled forces. So I have a pulling hand, pulling down, a pushing hand, pushing up. I take everything over the hard bone of the hip and I raise the height of the fulcrum, and we get very, very strong brakes indeed. If for whatever reason this should prove inadequate, we set up, lock, and we go from hands in front to behind the back brakes. We support everything in place, and from here, because of the very nature of the grip, the height of the fulcrum is dramatically higher than usual. So we get very, very strong brakes indeed. These are the core insights behind the braking phase. We'll be looking at these in more detail when we get into the actual heart and soul of the video. But this gives you a nice overview of the 6 main phases of the Judogatame system that I teach. Now, we're going to look, as we always do in the Enter the System series, at the central problems involved in the move that we're interested in. A big theme of the Enter the System series as a whole has been the idea that Jiu-Jitsu is ultimately problem-solving activity. Your opponent presents problems to you, you've got to solve them in the time available, and whoever solves each other's problems at a faster rate with better solutions typically wins the fight. Judogatame, like all the other submissions in the series, has a set of unique problems, and your ability to identify and overcome these problems is going to essentially be the factor which makes you either successful or unsuccessful out there on the mat with your opponents. Let's look at Judogatame in 3 different contexts, because interestingly, you're going to find that the central problems change with each context. You can attack your opponent from the front, you can attack your opponent from underneath, and you can attack your opponent from the back. And you're going to find that the central problems of Judogatame change relative to which one of those scenarios you find yourself in. We're going to start off in what I believe is probably the most problematic situation to employ Judogatame. That's where you're underneath people. Okay, and what you're going to find is that there are 3 central problems associated with attacking Juji from underneath. One of those problems, and probably the one that gives you all the most issues when you're going to apply this when you first start up with Juji, is the posture problem. If you can't control your opponent's posture, you're going to find it's damn hard to apply a Judogatame. Another problem, which we often deal with, is the pull-away problem. That your opponent can easily, if you don't do things correctly, simply pull his arm away. This is often linked to the posture problem. but there are some subtle differences between the two. But generally, the more your opponent can posture up, the easier it is for him to pull out. And the third problem, the bane of almost everyone who tries Judikatame from bottom position, is the stacking problem, where you attempt to get Judikatame, you enter it successfully, but your opponent keeps you folded in a deep stack, and you can't actually extend the guy and break his arm. So those are the three main problems, the three central problems of Judikatame from bottom position. Let's have a look at how we can deal with these. We're giving you an overview now. The precise details will come later in this video, but let's give you a general picture of what we're trying to do with regards to these problems and their solutions. Okay, first the problem of posture. What posture I need to optimally enter into Judy depends upon whether my opponent's on two knees or whether he's standing, okay, because they're going to be slightly different scenarios. We'll look at two knees first. Okay, the ideal posture for me to attack Juji is a 45-degree posture, where my opponent's spine and upper body come upwards at 45 degrees. If he's completely down, like so, it's hard for me to actually turn because I can't get past his elbows. Okay. If he's completely bolt upright, it's very hard for me to get into Judy because his elbow is just too damn far away from me. So the ideal posture here is around 45 degrees. Our whole thing is to get his elbow towards the center line and maintain his head at 45 degrees. And our favorite way of doing this is always through the use of collar ties. We can use either straight collar ties or outside collar ties, like so. When my opponent goes to yank away, it's physically a very difficult thing to do, whether we go outside tie or like so. From situations like this, we can always go up to control our training partner's collarbones and shoulder girdle, and from here the turns into Juji are relatively simple. Understand something. The best way for me to keep my opponent in some form of 45-degree angle is not just with the collar tie alone, but mostly with our legs, through the use of the top lock. If I have my feet locked at my opponent's lower back in a conventional closed guard, I'm operating, let's see our opponent's spine as a lever, okay? I'm operating at the bottom of the lever, and as a result, he can easily posture up and get away from me. But if I were to lock my guard higher and higher and higher on my opponent's body, I'm working my way up the lever. So when he goes to posture up, it becomes very, very difficult. This is the basic insight behind something like Eddie Bravo's rubber guard, which puts the lock of your guard very high on the lever and holds it in place. I'm not a particularly big advocate of rubber guard. I don't really use it much, but I am a big advocate of top locking, which is where we take our guard and lock it over the top of our opponent's shoulder, so the lock of our guard is behind his neck and head. Now you're operating really high on the lever, and as a result, when my opponent goes to posture up and away, we can easily keep him in that 45-degree posture. If I'm judicious with the use of my legs, if he tries to come forward, that won't be easy either. Come back up. When he tries to come forward into a stack, that won't be easy either. And from here, we can use our leg position to make a successful turn off the shoulder and go through into a winning position and put that man down to the floor. So as much as possible, when we go into a kind of a battle for our opponent's posture, the first stage of the battle will typically be through the use of collar ties. The second phase of the battle will be through the use of the top lock, so that when my opponent goes to pull away, you're dominating the end of the lever of his spine, and as a result, we're going to get good opportunities to go into strong Judikatame attacks. So that's typically how we deal with the posture problem when our opponent's on two knees. The posture problem gets more complicated when our opponent gets up to his feet. Once they get to their feet, they can get to a kind of posture that will literally shut down your Judikatame completely, and this is vertical posture. This is where he would want to be if he wanted to open up my closed guard. So for example, if Placido is in my closed guard and he successfully stands up and goes into a vertical posture, there's no way in God's green earth I'm going to be able to come up off the floor and attack Judikatame from here. His shoulders are a light year away from me in this position. So whenever this occurs, our whole thing is to break him down to a hip. I want to put his hip on the floor. A simple way for us to do this is to scoop inside our training partner's ankle, and from here to use a handstand sweep to put our opponent down to a hit. And in situations like this, now we can start to go back into successful judogatame turns, rolls, etc., and put our opponent down. Okay? So whenever we see an opponent in a standing situation going up into vertical posture, the onus is on us to break him back down to a hip. Once we get him down to a hip, then we can get back into the business of judogatame. So that's how we generally approach the first central problem of judogatame from bottom position, the posture problem. The next big problem that we often face, and it's probably fair for me to say this, probably the problem that all of you guys out there have the most issues with, is the stacking problem. Nothing more frustrating than get into a nice judogatame position and then have the guy just stack your head right over his head right over your head, and you can't get the arm extended, and consequently can't get the move to work. So how should we deal with the stacking problem? Again, this is more the overview. The precise details will be further into the video, but let's give a preliminary look at it now. Okay, we got into the judo position, but unfortunately our opponent started bringing his weight down upon us. The question will always be, what degree of weight has he applied? In the early phases of a stack, I generally recommend sweeping your opponent to his back. So what we want to do in these situations is take note of his base of support. It's, in this case, his right leg. I want to take my hips out beyond my opponent's base of support. Here's a very important rule for you. The direction of force of my judogatame is always revealed by the direction my feet are pointing. So what I want to do in these situations is to get my feet pointing away from his base of support. You can see my feet are pointing out here somewhere, away from his base of support. And as a result, it's very easy for us to put our opponent down and into a winning position. We killed the stack and put him on his back. From here, he's not going to be stacking us anymore. Let's have a look at that again from a different angle. From a situation where we get into a judogatame. Here, my opponent puts up his right foot and brings his head over my head. My feet are pointing in the same direction as his base of support. So there's no chance of success. If I try to push from this position, it's a losing gambit. But if I take my hips and push them out like so, now when I go to apply the judogatame, my feet are pointing well away from his base of support. And as a result, we can easily put him down to the mat and into a winning position. Okay. Now, a natural question to ask is, okay, well, that's nice, but what if my opponent really stacks me and completely folds my body so that his head is literally over my head and I physically cannot sweep him over to his back? What do I do now? Well, then we go to the next element where we come out the back door and roll our opponent. So from a very heavy stack where you feel there's just no chance of sweeping your opponent down to his back, and he's completely folded me over, now we simply come out the back door. And as you can tell by my relaxed voice, there's no danger of me being stacked. There's no pressure on my diaphragm. I'm in a relaxed position. And as a result, we can now take our time to turn our training partner through and successfully down into the judogatame. So once again, from a situation where we attack juji, but we get caught in a very deep stack, like so. From here, I just come all the way out the back door. And as a result, we're in the perfect position to start a lift and turn that puts our opponent down to a winning position. The third great problem that we face when we go to apply judogatame from bottom position will always be the pull-away problem. Nothing more frustrating than, slide down, sit down, of a situation where you're attacking judogatame and you go into the turn, and from here your opponent just pulls the arm away. Okay, it's just a frustrating and annoying thing. So we have to be able to do things that make it very difficult for him to accomplish this. Okay, let's have a look at some of those now. Once we get into a situation where we go on the attack, the first big element here is the shoulder pivot. Okay, I can't just naively go from a top lock and throw my leg over and hope for the best. We have to pivot off the shoulder in a way where my direction foot goes directly over his head. So when he goes to pull out, it's a very difficult thing. Then we have to manage the transition, the shoulder to shoulder transfer, where my left knee goes from his right shoulder to his left shoulder. That's done by the downward pressure of my right foot and a small movement that brings me right here, so that my knee is higher than my training partner's ear. Now when he goes to yank away and pull out, it's so damn difficult. And as a result, we can easily put our opponent down and into a winning position. Learning to overcome this constant danger of our opponent pulling his arm free as we make that critical transfer of our leg from one shoulder to the other is a big part of whether we're going to succeed or fail with the Judogatame. So those are the three central problems we face with Judogatame whenever we're in bottom position. I will add one amendment to the pull-out problem. Sometimes you get an opponent who's just so physically strong, so good at posturing up, that you feel like you did all the things I just recommended and he still just yanks his arm out. In these situations, I always counsel my students, go straight into your opponent's legs. Okay, the only way my opponent can pull his arm free is to expose his legs. It's physically impossible for him not to do this. Okay, so if I have Placido on top of me in a situation where, say for example, we've gone into a strong Judy attack and from here I've scooped into the legs, and despite my best efforts, I did everything, you did everything that I recommended, he's still just pulled out. Whenever we see this going on, we're just going to go and drop our foot into our training partner's hip on the far side and take our second leg across. So my legs scissor. My two hands go one at the knee and one at the ankle, and as a result we can quickly pull our body into a situation where I get his hands down to the mat. Once the hands come down to the mat, we find ourselves either in X guard or, my favorite, reverse X guard, and from here we can go around the corner and drop our opponent and go into the leg system, for which we're well known. This option will be explored in some detail later in the video, but that's one of the very best counters to a strong pull-out opponent, and one we'll be looking at in detail later in the video. So there you have it, the three central problems associated with Judogatame from bottom position, and a broad outlook. A broad look at the various ways we deal with it. The details, the nitty-gritty details, we'll look at later in the video, but that's the broad picture. Now, let's look at the three central problems associated with Judogatame when we've got him flat on his back and we're on top. Okay, it's tempting to look at this as, hey, we're going to win from here. Okay, we've got this guy down and we've done all that good work. It ain't over until the fat lady sings, they say, and Judogatame is no exception. Whenever we're here, we actually run into a bunch of interesting problems. First problem that we're going to look at, the first central problem of this supine position, is the leg scissor problem. My opponent can scissor his legs and go from bottom position up on top, and now you're right back into all those stack problems that we saw earlier. Okay, it always involves the same thing. It involves the scissoring of Placido's legs, which enables him to turn his hips down. And from here, he gets up quite easily and puts all kinds of ungodly pressure on me. Okay. Second problem that we have to deal with here is the elbow slip problem. This is a real heartbreaker. Very often when we work in situations like this, he will shuffle his body away from us just enough that he feels he can slip his elbow inside. It's like, ugh, it's gone. Okay. And the third problem is probably the most heartbreaking of them all. You actually do everything, you get the arm fully extended, and your opponent just turns out on you. It's like, it's gone. Okay. So those three problems: the problem of the leg scissor, which enables him to get up from bottom position and stack us; the problem of the elbow slip, where my opponent generates space and slips his elbow through; and the turnout problem, where my opponent literally just lets me extend his arm and then just turns out and walks out of the Judogatame. Those are probably the three central problems we face when we're on top of people here. Okay. Again, this is the broad overview of the Judy system and the central problems involved. The hard details, the small minutiae that we'll will come later in the video, but let's give you a broad picture here that we're working with. Whenever it comes to leg scissoring, we want to be able to stop our opponent's leg scissoring. Okay, so we've got a bunch of grips we can use here to get that done. First is an outside grip, where I take an outside scoop grip and hold my training partner's legs. This puts a limit on how far he can scissor his legs. It means essentially your opponent can get up to a 45-degree angle and no more. Okay, so it might look like he's going to get up, he never will. Okay, and now you can use your cross-faced leg at any given moment to sit him back down. This is not the only grip you can employ. One weakness of this grip is your opponent can scissor his legs and kick hard and free his leg. So sometimes we'll use an inside grip where we come through and we connect his elbow in towards our ribs. This is much harder for my opponent to kick out of. And in situations like this, we now have all kinds of options to pommel our legs into a variety of different holds, and we can do some tremendous work from this position. Okay. Another very useful grip is an inside scoop on the far leg, where we hold in like so. This too will make it difficult for your opponent to get up on top of you. As he tries to scissor the legs, he can scissor a little bit further, but you can always return him to the mat. Okay, and this creates a very, very strong off balance where you can simply return your opponent down to the floor. A fourth method of gripping involves sweeping his two legs towards you and getting elbow deep on the lower back. And as a result, we can now come up on top of an opponent and create very, very strong pin pressure using body weight. This also exposes our opponent's head to a much stronger crossface than usual, so that when we sit back down to the floor, you have very, very strong breaking positions to work with. Okay? So our first central problem, whenever we work against a supine opponent, is the problem of leg scissoring. And we've seen that we can work against it in 4 distinct grips. Outside on the near leg, inside on the near leg, inside on the far leg, and outside on the far leg. And in these ways, we can create tremendously effective jujigatame attacks that will shut down your opponent's leg work and prevent him coming up on top of you. Okay. Now let's talk about elbow slipping, the second great problem, central problem of this position. If my opponent starts shuffling away from me, small amounts of space begin to develop into which he can slip his elbow, and we lose the jujigatame. Okay. So the onus is on us to always work with asymmetrical legs when we go to hold people. The more symmetrical my legs, the bigger the hole through which my opponent can pull his elbow. But when we go with asymmetrical legs and a strong back heel, let's face this way, consider. Notice my foot position. When my foot, the torso leg foot, comes in, I back heel it into the armpit. Don't just be inert here with your foot. Okay, now we can get underneath it with the elbow, cause all kinds of problems. We want to back heel in tight to our training partner's armpit. My cross-face leg retracts back towards my training partner's jaw. And from here I take my hand, put it on the floor, or alternatively my elbow. The important thing is that my head is higher than his hands. Okay, if my head is lower than his hands, you're not going to hold people here for very long. So we come in and we hold this position with our asymmetrical legs. Every time I see him move away from me, I shuffle. We use what we call the juji shuffle, where I constantly shuffle my hips in towards his shoulder. If I ever feel space is developing between my hips and his shoulders, and there's a danger of an elbow slip, stop whatever you're doing and go back and get that connection. So if he moves away from me, it feels like I could maybe get it. No, I won't go for the separation. I will first go back in and recover the tightness of that connection to the shoulder. Okay. In this way, you can shut down a lot of elbow slipping before it really becomes a problem. Only when I feel everything's in secure and tight will actually go in and separate the arms and get the break. Now, the turnout problem. The turnout occurs because my opponent's right elbow goes over my left hip and the thumb points down. If that can happen, he can easily turn out of the duty and escape. Okay? So the onus is on us when we go to separate arms to keep his right elbow to our right hip. Then, as he turns his thumb down, we want to get half-hand grips that correct his thumb position, and then connect his right hand to our right shoulder. Then we have 2 hands on. We get very, very strong breaking pressure in these situations. Okay? So it's all about his elbow and our hip. Once we get that separation, it's all about connecting his right elbow to our right hip. His thumb points down, half hand grip, locks everything in place, and now we're in the perfect position to go through and get our breaks. In this way, we clearly have identified the three main or central problems associated with Judikatami when our opponent's flat on his back. Those is a broad overview of the ways we get around those three problems. Again, the hard details, the small details that really make a difference will be covered very, very extensively later on in the video, but that's the big picture. Now, we saw that there are three main scenarios for these central problems associated with Judikatami. Let's look now at the third and final one. This is when we're behind people and looking to apply Judikatami from the back position. First central problem of Judikatami from back. This is the turn in problem. The exact opposite of what we did when we were in front of people and they were flat on their back. We had a turn out problem. Now we've got a turn in problem. Let's have a look at this. Okay, plus it is facing this way. Okay, we're behind our opponent and we have an arm trapped and we're interested in applying Judikatami. Notice that when we go to apply Juji, we never have our feet in symmetrical position. We always go asymmetrical with our hooks and our foot goes across our training partner's stomach just like so. Okay. From here, we go into some form of grip. Usually it's a Kimura. There are other grips that we can use here, but Kimura is a good one for you to start with. And we're looking in these situations to throw our leg, a cross-face leg, over our opponent, and from here put him down into the Judikatami. Now here's where the problem gets interesting. Whenever you go to apply Juji in this situation, there's a competition between your cross-face leg and their ability to turn in towards you. And truth be told, there's a lot of famous cases where the person applying the Juji was on the losing end of that gambit. There's two ways this can go wrong. The first is that my opponent just aggressively turns in towards me and I physically cannot get my leg in front. Okay, that will often happen. Sometimes you'll even get the leg in front, but the guy just turns so aggressively into you that the leg becomes ineffective and the two legs get compressed and I can't actually control his head with my cross-face leg. Another way things can go wrong for you is you go over the top and your opponent catches your cross-face leg and locks the figure of four of his hands. And now you can't even apply the cross-face leg, it's shut down by his figure of four. All three cases are instances of your opponent turning into you, so they're just different manifestations of the turn-in problem. Okay, how do we get around this? My favorite thing to do when I know my opponent has a good turn-in is to lock his shoulder with a reverse top lock. I take my foot and just put it right over his shoulder. Then I just lock my 2 feet right here. So I don't even give him a cross-face leg. When he goes to turn in, I just push on his shoulder. And because we're influencing the end of the lever, far end of the shoulder girdle, you'll always put them down. In these situations, now we just adjust our body. I take my foot over my training partner's fists, and from here, we separate his hands and we go directly into a 3/4 Judikatami for a strong finish. Once again, the turn-in problem. We're here working. If we just naively throw the foot over, he can turn hard into us, grab the foot, do all kinds of things. And as a result, it's hard for us to be successful. When I feel my opponent is starting to turn into me, I like to lift the elbow to make it harder for him to turn in. Go to turn in, plus again. Lifting the elbow makes it harder. And I like to get my foot over his far shoulder. Then from here, when he goes to turn in, look, I can just push his shoulder down towards the mat. Once he's flat on the floor like this, it's a lot easier to deal with people. From here, we go over the top. We use the triangle of our legs to separate his arms. And from here, we get a good finish. So this is how I like to deal with the turn-in problem. I use what we call the reverse top lock. It's the same top lock we use from guard position, but because we're behind people, it's a reverse top lock. Same idea though. You control your opponent's shoulder girdle first, and you go Judikatami second. Another big problem associated with attacking from the back is your opponent's head position. This is a really interesting one. This occurs when your opponent is more of in a turtle position. You've got one hook in and you want to roll him and put him over into a Judikatami where he's flat on his back, which is a better position in general to attack from. How you go to attack will be very much determined by your opponent's head position, where his head is going, and you have to let's understand this. So let's have a situation where Placido is down, stable situation, and from here we have a foot in as a hook going across our training partner's body. So you can see my left foot is going across and out as a hook on the far side. From here we go in and we score elbow to elbow positioning on our training partner. The first thing I do in this situation is I look at Placido's head. If the head is down on the floor, then from here I will cover it with my shin. My shin goes over the top, and as a result we end up in a good attacking position to roll our opponent. I always face towards my training partner's legs. From here my left foot will back heel and my right shin will push forward to make him go, as you saw, hyped up in the air like this. It's like we just compress his head underneath his own chest and we can make him feel light. And as a result we can easily turn our training partner over and create situations where we can put him down on his back and go to dominate the position. So as a general rule, if my training partner's head goes down to the floor, I will cover it with my shin. Now a natural response on his part is to say, okay, if my head goes down to the floor, he's going to cover it with my shin, I'm going to keep my head up. Okay, that's what a lot of smart opponents would do. So whenever we see our opponent's head position changes from going down to going up, we change direction. Now I'm going to bring my leg around the corner and we're going to lock. I make sure I back heel so my foot comes back. From here I switch my hands and we're going to roll in the opposite direction and open our knee and use the so-called cross-face roll and put our opponent down to his back. By opening my knee, I get my opponent's head moving back and I turn him over. So essentially we just look at our opponent's head. If it's down, we cover it. If it's going up, we hook it. And in this simple fashion, we can determine, we can force our opponent to his back regardless of his head motion. This is an excellent way for us to ensure that we can force an opponent down to his back regardless of his head position. And this is our standard solution to the second central problem of attacking from the back. That's our opponent's head position. The third central problem associated with Judogatame from the back is the idea of misalignment. Remember, ultimately, every Judogatame, as the name implies, Judo means cross. Okay, Judogatame involves a cross of your body against your opponent's body. But when you start off behind people, you're lined up. So at some point, you've got to make a perpendicular switch. How do you make the perpendicular switch? If we're behind someone, in like so, I'm currently lined up with my opponent. So if we're going to go into Juji, I've got to get perpendicular somehow. If my two hands, one is on one side of Placido's body, one is on the other, my left is on his left side, my right is on his right, if my two hands stay in this position, I can never throw my leg over. It's physically impossible. The only way we can make a transition is to take both of our hands to one side of his body. There's no getting around this. Regardless of the kind of judo you attack from the back, you cannot have a hand on each side of his body. You've got to create situations where you transfer. The easiest transfer is the Kimura grip. It's not the only way we can do it, but it's, all things considered, probably the best. Okay? But only when I have two hands on one side of his body is it now possible for me to complete the perpendicular position that actually gives me a Judogatame. Okay? There are different ways we could do this. For example, if I'm behind an opponent, I can take my arm and punch through like so. Okay? But at some point, I've got to have two hands on one side of his body. No exceptions. And from here, we can go in and make finishes. I generally recommend when you start off in Judogatame attacks, use Kimura. It gives 2-on-1 control, it enables you to lift your opponent's elbow, and it creates a strong and robust frame which you can use to control your opponent's head. So once again, we're behind an opponent. I cannot, even with a Kimura, just throw my leg over from this position. At some point, we've got to create a change in angle where two hands come over and we lock. With two hands on one side of Placido's body, now it's possible for me to start throwing legs over the top and controlling the Judogatame position and going into our various attacks. Okay? But you're going to have to develop that insight and that confidence to know, as long as you've got a hand on each side of your opponent's body, you're not going to Judogatame anybody. You've got to get two hands to one side of the body so I can make the perpendicular shift. And the best way for you to start that journey is through the use of Kimura from the back. As I said, we'll be spending a lot of time in this video, as we go further into it, hashing out the details of all of these moves, concepts, and problems. But that gives you a nice overview of the 3 central problems associated with the 3 scenarios that we mostly apply Judogatame from the back, from the front, and from the top. As always with the Enter the System series, let's look at the core principles of the system that we're looking at. In this case, Judogatame. There are a large number of core principles in any wide-ranging system of Jiu-Jitsu, but let's narrow it down to 10 main ones in the case of the Juji system or armbar system. The first is the time and pressure principle. It is absolutely crucial that you understand that at championship level, the single most important prerequisite that guarantees victory is pressure over time. This is a world where everyone knows what the various moves are. Everyone knows the counters to the moves. And so ultimately what determines success or failure is always going to be your ability to keep your opponent under steady, unrelenting pressure that breaks them physically and mentally. In the case of Judogatame, you must be able to not just enter into the move, but hold them and control them in the move for long periods of time. It is very, very difficult for you to simply go in on a good opponent and finish them in a matter of seconds. This can happen, but more often than not, it's the ability to hold people for extended periods of time and maintain steady, unrelenting pressure that will create success. This video is largely bound up with exactly how to do this, how to keep people through 360 degrees of motion, rolling and controlling over time until finally we get the arm extended and victory is yours. The second big principle that we push in the Juji system is the multiplicity principle. This is the idea that there are actually quite a few different varieties of Judogatame. Each one has its good points and bad points. It is absolutely vital that you understand the variations and what they're good at and what they're not good at, so that you can use multiplicity in your favor and use a wide variety of tools to accomplish a wide variety of tasks. If you limit yourself to one form of Juji or just a few forms of Juji, you will limit the applications of the move on resisting opponents. So understand the various forms of Juji that I show in these videos and learn to use them all. A third very important principle is the joint above principle. Whenever you go to break a given joint in Jiu-Jitsu, it is absolutely critical that first you control the joint above it. Judogatame is ultimately a break of your opponent's elbow, but it all begins with control of the shoulder, which of course is the joint above the elbow. So whenever we go into Juji, focus on controlling the shoulder first. Focus on a good connection of your hips and legs to your opponent's head and shoulders, and you'll be in a good position to actually go through and complete the move by breaking the elbow. A fourth core principle of our Juji system is the right rule. If we're going after our opponent's right arm, we want to take his right elbow over our right hip and his right hand towards our right shoulder. If we're on the other side, of course, it'll be a left rule. This simple rule gives you a clear sense of direction when it's time to extend your opponent's arm and go through to the break. A fifth core principle of the Juji system is the height and hardness principle. Judogatame is a very clear instance of lever and fulcrum. The efficiency of the fulcrum is directly related to the height and the hardness of that fulcrum. The higher and harder the fulcrum, the more effective your breaking pressure will be. So it's important we learn to use the hard bones of the hip as the fulcrum and get that fulcrum as high as possible through leg positioning. All of this will be shown in the video. This will always be one of the main core principles of the Juji system. A sixth core principle is the gateway principle. Juji literally means cross. Whenever we take a cross position for the armbar, you are literally situated halfway down your opponent's body. That means you can attack with strangleholds, with triangles, arm locks, with Juji itself, and you can always go downstairs to the legs and go into the leg system and get lower body submissions. Learn to understand that Judigatami, because of its very nature, is a position which puts you in a midway situation on your opponent's body where you can go up to strangle, where you are for arms, and downstairs to the legs. Use it for what it is, a gateway to the whole body. Don't get tunnel vision and only attack your opponent's arm. Recognize that there's going to be opportunities to go up to strangles and down to legs, as well as stay on the arms. There is a seventh core principle associated with our Juji system. This is the top-bottom asymmetry principle. How you go to attack your opponent and how you go to apply Judigatami differs significantly based on whether you're attacking from bottom position, usually some kind of guard, or from top position. Understand that when you work from bottom position, the main problem you face is significantly different than when you work from top position. If I work for a top position Judigatami, 90% of my work is keeping my opponent's head down. If I work from bottom position, 90% of my work is keeping my hips up. So you can see that whether we work from top or bottom position, our general problem that we're working with is significantly different. In one case, it's about keeping the head down, and the other, it's about keeping our hips up. Keep this in mind as you work Judigatami from both top and bottom position, and you'll have a very clear sense of what your basic desiderata is. It'll give you a sense of direction. Make sure you understand there's a significantly different task ahead of you based upon whether you're on top or whether you're on bottom. The eighth core principle of the Juji system is the division principle. You've got two legs. When you go to apply Judigatami, understand something. Each leg has a distinct task associated with it. Don't just see yourself as two legs working the same task. Divide your legs up, and this division of labor will give you a clear sense of what each leg should be trying to do as you apply the Judigatami. You will have a cross-face leg and a torso leg, and the role of each leg is significantly different. A big part of this video will be showing exactly the way in which we apply force through our two legs onto our opponent. But always keep in mind this division principle. Always understand that each one of your legs has a distinct task associated with it. Understand what the tasks are, and you'll have a lot more success with Judigatami. A ninth core principle associated with our Juji system is the direction principle. It is absolutely essential that you understand where the force of your Judigatami is being applied. In combative situations, your ability to control, move, and ultimately submit your opponent is largely bound up with your ability to apply forces with your Juji in appropriate directions. The direction principle simply states that the direction of force of your Judigatami is always shown very clearly by the direction your feet are pointing. Once you understand this critical direction principle, you will know exactly where you need to apply forces relative to your opponent to keep his head down, roll him through, or straighten out his arm and get into a winning position and his true elbow lock. Make sure you understand this principle. Know where you're exerting your force at any given moment in Judigatami, and you will soon learn that your ability to do so will have positive effects on your finishing rates. A 10th and final core principle of the Juji system is the coupled forces principle. We've seen this in other systems that I teach. The idea is that whenever we go to break a human joint, we must exert opposing forces in opposite directions at the same time upon the joint. Just as you would never tear a piece of paper with one hand, but always rip it using two hands in opposing directions, so too when you go to break the elbow. Let's make sure we've got a fulcrum pushing upwards. Let's make sure we've got a push hand and a pull hand so that we combine forces in opposing directions upon the elbow and maximize our breaking pressure. These are not the only principles of the Judigatami system, but they are the 10 most important ones and the ones I want you focusing on as you begin your study of Judigatami and go forward into the future.